My name is David, and I taught fourth grade at PS 234, just 3 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The towers were our backdrop, the silent giants that watched over my students as they played in the schoolyard. That morning, we had just finished the Pledge of Allegiance. The kids were settling in for a math lesson. The first sound was a low, muffled boom that rattled the large windows in our classroom. A few of the kids gasped. I told them it was just construction, the kind of lie adults tell to maintain order. I walked to the window and saw a sight that didn't belong, a plume of black smoke pouring from the North Tower. I tried to keep them calm, to create a bubble of normalcy in the classroom. It's just a fire, everyone. Let's get back to our work. But their faces were already turned to the window, their eyes wide. A few minutes later, we all saw it. There was a collective, sharp intake of breath in the room as the second plane roared past our window. It was so low, so fast. For a single horrifying second, I could see the UA logo on its tail. Then it disappeared behind a building, and a moment later, a huge fireball erupted from the side of the South Tower. This time, the boom was sharp, loud. The kids screamed. A little girl in the front row, Maria, started to sob. "Mr. Jensen," she cried, "is it a war?" That question broke me. How do you explain this to a 9-year-old? In that moment, my only job, my only purpose on Earth was to protect the 25 children in my care. I had to become a shield against a reality that was too horrible for them to comprehend. I pulled the blinds shut, a useless gesture, and herded the kids into the center of the room, away from the glass. "Okay, everyone," I said, my voice shaking, "we're going to play a game. It's called the quiet game." We sat on the floor, and I started reading a story to them, my voice a strained monotone, trying to drown out the growing symphony of sirens outside. The weight of their innocent, trusting faces looking up at me was heavier than anything I have ever felt. The evacuation order came over the school's intercom. We had to go. I lined the children up, holding hands, and told them we were going on a walk. "Everyone hold on to your partner and don't let go." We walked out of the sanctuary of our school and into a nightmare. The air was filled with fluttering paper. Then a light, gray ash began to fall like a gentle snow. It was the dust of the buildings, of the furniture, of the people. I told the kids it was smoke dust and to pull their collars over their mouths. I was trying to narrate a fairy tale while walking through the mouth of hell, my line of little ducklings following me trustingly. We were trying to get north, away from the chaos, when the ground began to shake and the roar began. It was a sound from the depths of the earth, a sound of absolute destruction. I didn't have to look. I grabbed the kids and shoved them into the recessed doorway of a closed shop, covering as many as I could with my own body. I screamed at them to close their eyes. I watched as the South Tower ceased to exist, collapsing into a roiling cloud of smoke that raced toward us. I just held those small bodies, squeezed my eyes shut, and waited for the end. The dust cloud washed over us, hot and choking, but we were spared the worst of it. I led all 25 of my students to safety that day. The papers called me a hero, but I quit teaching. I was diagnosed with a chronic anxiety disorder. I couldn't stand in front of a classroom of children anymore. I felt like a fraud. I had failed in my most basic duty, to protect them from the evil of the world. I have a nightmare where I am reading them a story, and I look up and the classroom has no walls, and the children are all looking up at the burning towers, their faces blank. My trauma isn't what I saw. It's what they saw reflected in their eyes. It's the burden of knowing I was the last barrier of their innocence, and that barrier was shattered forever. My name is Rick. For 20 years, I flew the news chopper for a major network. I'd seen it all. Fires, floods, riots. My job was to be a detached eye in the sky,
to show the story, not to feel it. When the call came in for a fire at the World Trade Center, I thought it was just another big story. We scrambled from the heliport and flew toward Manhattan. From 5 miles out, I knew this was different. The column of smoke was too black, too thick. As we got closer and I saw the gash in the North Tower, a cold knot formed in my stomach. This was no fire. This was a wound. My cameraman was filming and I was doing my job, circling at a safe distance, reporting what I saw to the news desk through my headset. We are circling the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The damage appears to be on the upper floors, a significant amount of smoke and debris. I was a professional, calm, collected. But then I looked through the telephoto lens of the camera display. I could see them, the people. They were in the broken windows, waving clothes, waving their arms. I saw a group of them crowded onto the roof. I was a mile away, but I could see their desperation. The professional detachment evaporated. These were people, and they were trapped, and my only job was to film them die. The feeling of being a vulture, a paid observer of suffering, was eating me alive. I was yelling at my news director over the radio. "You have to tell them we can see people on the roof. Can't we do anything?" But I knew the answer. The updraft from a fire that intense would tear my helicopter apart. There was nothing I or anyone could do. I was forced to just circle, to watch, to document. Then my cameraman screamed into the intercom, "Rick, look! Look south!" I banked the chopper and saw it. The second plane. From my vantage point, I had a god's eye view. I saw it streak over the harbor and turn toward the South Tower. I screamed into my radio, "There's another one! A second plane is about to impact the South Tower! This is an attack!" I watched it happen. I watched the plane merge with the building in a silent, horrific flash. The heat from the fireball washed over my helicopter a moment later, a wave of palpable heat even from our distance. My professional life was over in that instant. I was no longer a news pilot. I was a witness to an act of war, a helpless man in a metal bubble watching a massacre unfold below. My job was to keep filming, to keep circling. We filmed the people jumping. We filmed the fires spreading. My cameraman was weeping, but he kept the camera rolling. I felt like a ghoul, circling a dying city. My rotor blades just another part of the soundtrack of hell. We were in the air when the towers fell. From our perspective, it was a slow, majestic, and utterly sickening sight. We watched the South Tower, then the North, surrender to gravity and collapse into a boiling cloud of their own pulverized remains. I saw the dust cloud, the pyroclastic flow, roll out and consume dozens of city blocks, consuming thousands of people, including the first responders I had watched rush toward the buildings. The sound over my headset was just the raw, unfiltered screaming of my producers back at the station. We had just broadcast the murder of a landmark and everyone in it to the entire world. I landed the helicopter that day and never flew again. The FAA medically grounded me for severe PTSD. I have a recurring nightmare where I am trapped in the helicopter. The controls are frozen, and I am forced to circle the burning towers for eternity, the faces of the people in the windows staring back at me. I can't watch the news. I can't hear the sound of a helicopter. My trauma comes from the guilt of my perspective. I was given a perfect, unobstructed view of hell, and my only job was to make sure no one could look away. I was the eye of the storm, and what I saw destroyed my soul.
My name is Helen. I was an accountant, and every morning I took the E-train from Queens to the World Trade Center station. It was a part of my routine so ingrained it was like breathing. That morning I was reading a novel, packed in with the usual crowd, the familiar rumble of the train a comfort. We were in the tunnel, deep under the Hudson River, when the train slammed on its emergency brakes. We were thrown forward, a wave of bodies and briefcases. The lights went out, plunging us into absolute, terrifying darkness. A moment later, we felt it, a deep, subterranean thud that vibrated through the floor of the car.
a sound that felt like the earth itself had been struck. We were trapped in the dark for what felt like years. People's nervous chatter turned into panicked whispers. A baby started crying. The air grew hot and stale. There were no announcements, just the suffocating darkness and the feeling of being in a metal coffin buried under a river and a city. My mind started to race. A derailment? A bombing in the subway? We were completely blind, completely helpless. After maybe 20 minutes, a transit worker with a powerful flashlight forced open the door to our car. His face was pale. "We have to evacuate," he said, his voice strained. "Everyone, out. Follow me, stay on the catwalk." We walked in a single-file line through the pitch-black tunnel, the only light coming from the worker's flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The air was strange, filled with a faint, dusty haze. We could feel more vibrations through the tracks, a low, continuous rumble that made the ground feel unstable. We were like miners escaping a collapse, moving toward a pinpoint of light that was an emergency exit staircase. We had no idea what we were walking toward. We just knew we had to get out of the ground. The fear of being buried alive was more powerful than anything else. We emerged from a ventilation grate onto Church Street, climbing out of the ground like creatures from another world. And the world we emerged into was gone. The first thing I noticed was the sky. It wasn't blue. It was filled with smoke and paper, millions of pages of it drifting down like a blizzard. I looked up to where the towers were supposed to be, and my mind simply broke. Both towers were on fire, with monstrous black wounds in their sides. It was an apocalyptic vision, so fundamentally wrong that my brain couldn't accept it. The world I'd been in when I went underground that morning no longer existed. In its place was a war zone. We stood there, a small group of stunned commuters covered in tunnel grime, unable to process the scene. Then the sound began, a cracking, groaning roar like the world was tearing in half. We watched in utter disbelief as the South Tower, a structure I had thought to be as permanent as a mountain, began to dissolve. It pancaked down, floor by floor, in a horrifyingly orderly cascade of destruction. A monstrous cloud of gray dust erupted from its base and rolled down the street toward us, swallowing everything in its path. We ran. I ran blindly, a primal scream caught in my throat as the cloud overtook me, plunging me from a gray world back into a black one, this time filled with choking, suffocating dust. I never took the subway again. I was diagnosed with severe claustrophobia and clythrophobia, the fear of being trapped. I moved out of the city. I can't be in a room without windows. I can't be in a tunnel. I can't be underground. My terror is born from that whiplash of experience. I went from the quiet, contained darkness of the subway tunnel into the loud, open-air apocalypse on the street, and then was plunged back into the suffocating darkness of the dust cloud. I have nightmares where I'm clawing my way out of the ground, only to find that there is no world to emerge into. I escaped the tomb underground, only to find the whole world had become a graveyard. My name is Javier. For 7 years, my office was a small platform hanging against a wall of glass 1,000 feet in the sky. I was a window washer. I knew the towers better than I knew my own apartment. I knew which windows rattled in the wind. I knew the way the sun hit the south face at noon. That morning was perfect for the job. No wind and a sky so blue and clear I felt like I could see all the way to the end of the world. I was harnessed to my rig, squeegee in hand, working my way down the 85th floor, the North Tower. There was a peaceful solitude up there, just the squeak of my blade on the glass and the faint hum of the city far below. It was just me and the sky. The impact wasn't a sound at first. It was a feeling. A deep, violent vibration shot through the steel skeleton of the tower and into my platform, into my bones. It felt like a train had crashed inside the building. My platform swung wildly, slamming me against the glass with a force that knocked the wind out of me. The window I just cleaned shattered, imploding inward. I looked up and my heart stopped. 10 floors above me, the building was gone. There was just a black, ragged hole vomiting fire and smoke into the perfect blue sky. The smell of jet fuel, a smell I knew from the airport, hit me instantly. It was a smell that didn't belong up here. I was trapped, dangling on a string 1,000 feet up just below a raging inferno. My radio was dead, just static. I was completely, utterly exposed. The heat from above was blistering and flaming debris began to fall past my rig, little pieces of the plane and the building tumbling into the abyss below. I could hear the building groaning, a constant deep, metallic scream of a structure in agony. I could feel those screams vibrating through the cables holding me, telling me that the thing I was attached to was dying. I was a bug pinned to a dying beast. My training, my experience, it was all useless. I was just a man in a cage, waiting to fall. From my terrifying perch, I saw the second plane. I saw it coming up the river, saw it bank over the Statue of Liberty. It was like watching a shark moving through the water, all predatory grace and terrifying purpose. I watched it slice into the South Tower with an impossible ease. There was a silent flash of orange, and then the sound of the explosion, a deep whump, reached me. At that moment, I knew this wasn't an accident. I was hanging in the middle of a war zone. I was nothing but a target, a spectator with the worst seat in the world, waiting for my turn to die. I started to pray, not to be saved, but for it to be quick. I don't know how long I hung there. An hour? A lifetime? The building shuddered and groaned, and with every lurch I was sure the cables would snap. Then a miracle born from disaster. A huge piece of debris fell and struck my rig, not cutting it, but sending it swinging wildly inward. It slammed into the building about 4 floors below my original position, right next to a window that had been blown out. It was a black, empty square. I unclipped my harness, my hand shaking so badly I could barely work the carabiner, and crawled through the broken glass into a deserted, smoke-filled office. I was back inside. I found the stairwell and joined the slow, grim procession of survivors heading down. I made it out, but I left the man I was on that platform. I was diagnosed with severe acrophobia and PTSD. I can't even stand on a chair now. I dream every night that I'm still in the rig, the cables snapping one by one, the sound of the groaning steel all around me as I begin to fall. I work as a gardener now. My hands need to be in the dirt, connected to the ground. I had to quit my job because my office was the sky, and on that day, the sky became the face of hell itself. I could never look up again.
My name is Jessica, and on September 11th, 2001, it was my 3rd day as a temp for a small insurance company on the 52nd floor of the South Tower. I was still learning people's names, still trying to figure out the phone system. The building felt like a city in the sky, immense and intimidating. I felt like an imposter. I was just trying to make it to lunchtime without making a fool of myself. I was at the copy machine when the building swayed. It was a long, sickening motion, like being on a cruise ship hitting a massive wave. The coffee in my mug sloshed onto my hand. Everyone ran to the north-facing windows. I followed, my heart pounding. What we saw was incomprehensible. A massive, jagged hole in the North Tower, just across the way, with thick black smoke pouring out. It looked like a special effect, something from a disaster movie. It didn't seem real. People started murmuring, speculating. A small plane? A helicopter crash? No one knew. But the sight of it, the gaping wound in our sister tower, filled me with a primal animal fear. We were 1,000 feet in the air in a matching tower, and I felt like a target. Then the voice came over the building's PA system. A calm, authoritative male voice. Your attention, please. Building 2 is secure. There is no need to evacuate Building 2. The situation is under control. They repeated it. My manager, a man named Robert, clapped his hands. "Okay, everyone, you heard the man. Back to work. Let's not stand around gawking." Most people listened. They shuffled back to their desks, their faces pale, but they obeyed. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead. Something was screaming inside my head, "Get out! Get out now!" An older man from the mailroom, I think his name was Sal, walked past me toward the exit. He looked me in the eye and just nodded. He didn't say anything, but his look was clear. He was leaving. Robert, my manager, said, "Sal, where do you think you're going? They told us to stay put." Sal just looked at him and said, "I've lived long enough to trust my gut, not a voice in a box." And he walked into the stairwell. I made a choice. It was the most important choice of my life. I dropped my coffee mug on the floor and followed him. Robert yelled after me, "Jessica, you'll lose this position." I didn't care. The stairwell was almost empty at that point. Just me, Sal, and a few others who had decided to ignore the announcement. It was quiet, brightly lit and orderly. We were moving at a good pace. We had probably made it down to about the 30th floor when our building was hit. It was not a sway, it was a convulsion. The entire stairwell shook with a violence that threw us against the concrete walls. The lights went out, plunging us into absolute blackness. The air was filled with the sound of groaning metal, shattering glass, and the screams of the people behind and above us. The stairwell filled instantly with the thick, sickeningly sweet smell of jet fuel. The calm descent had turned into a panicked flight from a collapsing tomb. The rest of the way down was a blind, terrifying scramble. The stairwell lights were gone. The only illumination came from the screens of the few cell phones that still worked. The steps became slick with water from broken pipes, and the smoke grew thicker with every floor we descended. People were falling, getting trampled. We were no longer colleagues or strangers. We were just a herd of terrified animals, driven by the singular instinct to get out. I lost Sal in the darkness. I just held onto the railing and kept putting one foot in front of the other, convinced that any second the building would come down on top of us. When we finally stumbled into the lobby, it was a war zone. The huge glass windows were all blown out. Emergency workers were screaming, trying to direct the river of bleeding, dust-covered survivors out into the street. Stepping outside was like stepping onto another planet. The air was gray and thick with debris. I didn't look back. I just ran. I was blocks away when the tower I had just been in ceased to exist. Robert and everyone else I had met on the 52nd floor were gone. I was alive because I followed a mailroom guy I didn't even know into a stairwell. I was alive because of a gut feeling, and that is what haunts me. It wasn't skill or bravery. It was luck, a random, stupid choice. I suffer from crippling survivor's guilt. I have nightmares where Robert is screaming at me for leaving. I can't work in an office. I can't be part of a team because my team is dead, and I don't know why I'm not.
My name is Mark, and I lived 3 blocks from the World Trade Center. Every morning at 8:30, I'd take my golden retriever, Buster, for his walk. It was our ritual. That morning was no different. The air was cool and crisp, a perfect late summer day. We were on our usual route, heading toward the plaza. The towers were just part of the scenery. 2 giant concrete and glass mountains that were always there. Buster was chasing a pigeon. I was thinking about what to have for breakfast. Normalcy. That's the thing I remember most. The absolute boring normalcy of it all right before the world cracked open. We were a block away when the sound hit. It wasn't an explosion like you hear in the movies. It was a sound that didn't make sense. It was the shriek of 1,000 tons of metal being twisted and torn apart, combined with a deep, resonant thump that I felt in the soles of my feet and the fillings of my teeth. The ground shuddered. Buster yelped and tried to bolt, the leash yanking my arm. Then the rain started. It wasn't water, it was paper. Millions of sheets of office paper fluttering down from the sky like a ticker tape parade from hell. Some of it was on fire, little black and orange embers drifting down around us. I looked up and my brain went into vapor lock.
There was a hole in the north tower, a massive black smoking hole with flames licking out of it like the tongue of a dragon. The air was instantly filled with a strange chemical smell. People were pouring out of the surrounding buildings, pointing, screaming, crying. No one knew what was happening. I just knew I had to get Buster home. He was whimpering, pressing against my leg, terrified by the sounds and the chaos. I was trying to pull him north, away from the scene, when the second sound began. It was a roar that grew and grew until it was all that existed. It was directly over our heads. I looked up again, and this time I saw it. The plane. It was so low, so big, it blotted out the sun for a second. It was gray, and it was moving with a terrifying speed and purpose. I watched it disappear into the side of the South Tower. The impact was different this time. It was a concussive blast that felt like a bomb going off in my ears. A fireball erupted from the other side of the building, and a new shower of debris rained down. This wasn't paper. This was heavy. Chunks of metal, pieces of glass, things I couldn't identify, clattering onto the pavement and cars around us. We were in a war zone. I grabbed Buster and dove into the doorway of a deli, shielding him with my body. That doorway became our prison for the next few minutes. We were trapped by the falling debris and the sheer panic on the street. And from that doorway, I witnessed the final horror. I couldn't see the top of the towers clearly, but I could hear. Over the alarms and the sirens, I began to hear individual screams from high above. Then I heard the sound. I will hear it until the day I die. It was a series of sickening, wet, percussive impacts on the pavement and on the roofs of the smaller buildings across the street. It was the sound of bodies hitting the ground. I didn't have to see it. The sound was enough. The sound unmakes a person. It turns them from a human being into just meat. Buster was shaking uncontrollably, and so was I. The rumbling started deep in the earth. It grew into a roar louder than anything I had ever heard, a sound of the world being torn apart. I peeked out of the doorway and saw the South Tower pancaking. The floors were collapsing into one another in a horrifying, unstoppable cascade. Then the cloud came, a wall of gray dust and smoke, 1,000 feet high, moving down the street toward us like a nuclear blast wave. I pulled Buster deeper into the doorway as the world went completely black. The roar was deafening, and then the air was gone, replaced by a thick, choking powder that filled my mouth and lungs. I was buried alive. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. I thought, this is it. This is how I die. I have no idea how long we were in that cloud. When the world slowly came back into view, it was gray. Everything, the street, the cars, me, my dog, was covered in a thick layer of fine, gray, gritty dust that was made of the building and the people inside it. I eventually made it home, a ghost walking through an apocalyptic landscape. I had to leave New York. I suffer from severe claustrophobia now. Being in that dust cloud felt like being buried. And I have astrophobia, an irrational fear of loud noises. A car backfiring, a clap of thunder, and I'm right back in that deli doorway, shielding my dog, hearing the roar of the plane and the final awful sound of the bodies hitting the ground. That sound is the ghost that lives in my head.
My name is Anna. I was a freelance graphic designer, and my prized possession was my small apartment in Brooklyn Heights. The rent was criminal, but the view was my payment. I had a perfect, unobstructed panorama of the lower Manhattan skyline. The Twin Towers were the anchors of my world. I drank my morning coffee with them. I watched the sunset paint them orange and purple. I saw them glittering in the dark as I went to bed. They weren't just buildings. They were two silent, steady friends who were always there. That morning, the sky was a shade of blue so pure and deep it felt holy. I was on my balcony, sketchbook in hand, coffee steaming next to me, feeling lucky to be alive. That feeling lasted until 8:46 a.m.
I saw it before I heard it. A flicker of silver against the blue, moving too fast, too low. My brain couldn't process it. For a split second, I thought it was a film shoot, a special effect. Then it vanished into the side of the North Tower. There was no sound, not from my distance, just a silent, blossoming flower of orange fire and black smoke. It was the most beautiful and most horrifying thing I had ever seen. The silence was the worst part. It felt like watching a silent movie of the world ending. A few seconds later, a deep, guttural boom rolled across the river and shook the windows of my apartment. The dream was over. The nightmare had begun. I stood there, frozen on my balcony, my coffee forgotten. I couldn't look away. The gash in the tower was obscene, a gaping, bleeding wound on my friend's face. Smoke poured out of it, a thick black column that stained the perfect blue sky. I could hear sirens starting, a faint chorus of panic from across the river. I grabbed my binoculars, my hands shaking so badly I could barely focus them. I saw things I wished to God I could unsee. Tiny figures in the broken windows, waving, disappearing back into the smoke. I was a helpless spectator, watching the worst thing imaginable from the comfort of my own home. That feeling of safe, distant horror is a unique kind of poison. Then came the second plane. I saw this one coming too. It came up the harbor and I watched it bank, its wings glinting in the sun. There was a horrifying intentionality to its movement. It wasn't an accident. It was an arrow aimed at the heart of the city. I watched it slice into the South Tower with a grace that was sickening. Another silent blossom of fire, bigger and lower this time, followed by another earth-shaking boom. My view, my beautiful, perfect view, was now a portrait of hell. The two towers were burning, two giant torches consuming thousands of souls, and I was watching it like a television show. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but I was rooted to the spot, a prisoner of my own balcony. The most terrible part began then. Through the binoculars, I saw the impossible. Little specks detaching themselves from the building and falling. I thought it was debris at first, but then I focused, and my stomach turned to ice. They were people, tiny figures, tumbling end over end for what seemed an eternity against that perfect, mocking blue sky. They were jumping. I dropped the binoculars and threw up over the side of my balcony. I was watching people choose to fall a quarter of a mile to their deaths rather than burn. The scale of that suffering, seen from a distance, completely unraveled my mind. I was watching the unspeakable, and I could do nothing. Then came the South Tower. It didn't fall. It unmade itself. One moment it was there, wounded but standing, and the next it was simply gone, dissolving into a waterfall of smoke and steel that cascaded to the ground. The roar reached me a few seconds later, a physical force of sound. My skyline was broken. My friend was gone. 29 minutes later, I watched the North Tower do the same. It shuddered, the antenna on top sank into the building, and then it too was erased from existence, consumed by a roiling cloud of its own dust. The cloud was a living thing, a gray monster that spread out and swallowed the tip of Manhattan. I sold that apartment a month later. I live in the mountains now, where the only tall things are trees. I was diagnosed with severe agoraphobia and PTSD. I can't look at a clear blue sky without my heart starting to pound. That perfect, beautiful sky is now a canvas for the worst thing I have ever seen. My terror isn't of being in a building, it's of looking at them. My memory of that morning isn't a memory, it's a film that is permanently burned onto the back of my eyes. My beautiful view became my curse, and the ghosts of the falling people
are silhouettes I see every time I dare to look up.